Just give me a sign. Oh, I should go there. Okay. We have the camera for is it already on? Oh. Okay. So, good evening, everybody. Nice that you are here. And let me introduce you our speaker, who is today Alex Bykov, architect, coming originally from Ukraine, but now working in Brno, which is only a few kilometers away from Bratislava. Alex is a very dear colleague of mine, and especially because he's a very active guy working in a public field and fighting for Ukrainian modern architecture heritage, which is very sympathetical for me. So I hope you will enjoy his speech and his talks about his experiences in doing so in Kiev a few months or a few years already ago. Alex, thank you very much for coming. This is really an honor for us, and I'm very happy that you can be here in person, because it is not always the case. So I will give the floor to you now. Thank you, and we are very much looking forward to your talk.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and it's really a great pleasure to be here. Maybe we can turn off other lighting.
Yes, I will.
So,
oh, sorry.
Okay. So my name is Alex Bykov, and today my lecture, the name of my lecture is 3 books, 3 histories, and I bring these 3 books for you. So maybe you can go through it during my lecture, I don't know, with some light in your phones, it's up to you. So I have a lot of slides and desire to tell you a lot of things, so it will be quite intensive architectural mind workout, so please be ready and let's give it away. 3 books. I choose this topic because all these books, or even 2 books and 1 magazine, I did by myself in collaboration with my friends and partners, and all of them are about architectural history in Ukraine and architectural issues in Ukraine. And all these books, or these projects, I would say even, they are kind of trigger for me to study architecture by myself. And they are kind of trigger for today's lecture to tell you more also about the history of Ukrainian architecture. So the first one, and maybe the most well-known book is called Soviet Modernism, Brutalism, Postmodernism in Ukraine. And it was published in 2018, but the study of this topic started a long time ago, I believe in 2010, and I started to research this topic because I felt kind of emptiness in my architectural education, and I felt that I'm not informed too much in this particular topic, let's say in the 20th century architecture of after Second World War architecture. So I decided to study it by myself, because unfortunately during my studies it was not enough information and even tutors. I don't want to blame to anyone, but the fact is the fact. And so short story about this architecture. In 1955, Khrushchev made his declare against decoration in architecture, and the new program of rebuilding the Soviet Union started. The force was to give like enough square meters for each person to live, to inhabit new residential blocks with Soviet people, and it started a new wave of modernism architecture. It ended up in 1991. That's why the book is called also, like there is this periodization, like 1955, 1991. And after that, it was kind of forgotten and forbidden even to talk about this architecture, because it was the time of a new Ukrainian independence, and so on and so on. And it was not only in Ukraine, it was all over the post-Soviet countries. And everything changed in 2010s, and this man, who was one of the, let's say, he was pioneer of the Soviet architecture generally. He was based in Moscow, but he was kind of international Soviet architect. He knew a lot of architects from all over Soviet republics, and then he decided to make kind of last call for all back then alive architects from post-Soviet territories. His name was Felix Novikov, and he made this book about this architecture, kind of his diaries, and also he was one who made this and forced to make this project Soviet Modernism, which was in 2010-11, and it was held in Vienna. So it was last meeting of all Soviet architects. And yeah, then we spent a lot of time with him. I was interviewing him and asking about Ukrainian architects. Unfortunately, he passed away 2 years ago. And then it's forced to make new projects of studies and researching this topic. And now I will give you a number of slides and pictures with some of them. So this one was Trespassing Modernism. It was kind of next stage after that last meetings of Soviet architects in Vienna, and it was held by these guys from Vienna and also by Ruben Ravshityan from Armenia. And they started this project and then made another one and another one. So this was, on this picture you see the last one, it was travel and exhibition around all post-Soviet republics. So another important project was this publication, probably you know, it's CCCP, Cosmic Communism Construction Photographer. It was made by French photographer Frédéric Chebin, but it was more about, let's say, like photography project rather than some specific architectural studies. And there was some text, but they were weird and strange. Honestly, it was like kind of his prediction what this architecture was about and things like that. But we met each other a couple of times. I also interviewed him, and he agreed that he was not like 100% responsible for all texts that were written there, but for sure it was super nice photo catalog of this architecture. And then another way where you can study this topic were Soviet magazines, but unfortunately all of them were also like under state control, and you can't get a lot of information through going through these magazines, but you can read in between the lines, as it was normal things during the Soviet times to be able to read between the lines. But I wanted more, and then I started to buy all possible books on the flea markets and trying to get all information there. And also I met a lot of authors who were still alive and interviewed them. We did a couple of documentaries, publications, etc. Now I will show you. And also I was trying to save all state archives because unfortunately they were like disappearing on my eyes under force of big business and big developers. But in these books you can find really super nice archival material as these colorful and super nice photos. Also, you can find out the names of photographers and get to know them and then ask them like another additional information. And then, step by step, me and some of my friends, we started to do our own projects in Ukraine, not like in Vienna or where else. This one was made by Grupa Predmetov, led by Ivan Melnichuk and Alexander Burlaka. So they selected couple of small architectural forms from that period in Kiev and renovated them. Then they did the first map of Kiev Soviet modernism architecture. They made this list of the buildings. It was also not like a full list of projects and buildings, but it was the first tries. Another friend of mine, he also photographed all famous objects in Kiev. He did it on a film camera, and for instance on these photos on the left the famous UFO building is not You can't see it like this because it's caged by a new shopping mall. And on the right side, this pavilion is not exist yet. And some others, so it kind of also archived work which we did by ourselves. Another project was made by Evgenia Gubkina, who is co-author of my book, and you will see her next time, I saw, by the way. So she did this city guide on the city of Slavutich, which was a nice last swan song of Soviet architecture. This city was built for the saviors of the Chernobyl disaster, and it was built, the whole city was built during 2 years. Sometimes these days we can't finish our reparation at our apartment for 4 years, yes, but they built a city during 2 years. And some photos from archive of one of these architectural photographers, whose name was Alexander Ranchikov. I also kind of scanned, saved, digitalized all these photos, and then I shared it to like journalism, like journal publications, all exhibitions. And this is my first exhibition, which I did with some architectural magazine. And I used a lot of this saved archival material for this project. So inside was all this architectural archive, photo archive, and from the outside it was there were covers of this magazine. And this was my first publication, which I did about architect Edward Bilski, and he was one of the leaders and also pioneers. So you can see like a lot of information on the pages. I also interviewed him. I did all captions for all his materials, and then I also shared this digital archive to all of my friends, and now these materials can be used by a lot of scientists and architectural researchers all over the world, because some of the photos are now traveling across all web publication and Instagram. Another publication which I did about amazing woman Tatiana Belyeva, it's quite a rare example when during the Soviet times woman was able even to lead the architectural project, but even more, she received the biggest architectural honor in Soviet Union. You can see on the right side for this pioneer camp in Crimea. So it was amazing achievement. And then another publication about amazing couple who were artists, not architects, but they were involved, or they were authors. From the beginning they were involved, and later on they became author of this famous building, probably you saw. This is crematorium in Kiev, and this is really something special. So the story is that there was this funeral halls, and there was a huge wall next to these halls, and this wall was a big sculpture. And they were doing the sculpture during 12 years. And one day they saw a Soviet committee who decided to close this sculpture. So now you see the process of making this amazing piece of art, and you can see the scale. So they did it by themselves, only 2 of them. On the far right, you see these halls, and this memory hall is called, and now you see the whole panorama. And after all, it ended up on the right bottom. So it was completely covered after it was mostly finished. And it was a great and big disaster for them as an artist and for the whole architectural Kiev community. Another pictures of this wall. And Volodya spent all the rest of his life trying to this is the process of covering this wall with the concrete. So he was trying to save the memory of this project, and he was trying to bring attention to this project. And when I started to do this topic, there was no information, even though he did everything he can. He did all, he was trying to do constantly something, but there was a lack of information. And we started to also bring attention to this case. This is my photos of these farewell halls, and this is photo of Volodymyr when we met him. another photo. So he's a super nice person, and he managed, with the help of us and a lot of other people, to make kind of foundation of their legacy. And he managed also to find out money to recover part of this wall. So we see how it was before it was covered. And you can follow this web page, ARVM. And now, unfortunately, he also passed away a year ago, but the foundation is running, and their studio, which is based in the center of Kyiv, now is kind of studio museum. And another photos of recovering this wall. And then was the biggest exhibition we did about the Soviet modernism, when we combined all information which we saved and collected. It was called Nadbudova, or in English, superstructure. And it was opened in 2016. And it was a big success, honestly, because first of all, people really were absolutely surprised that this architecture had such a huge legends behind these grey facades. And there was really so much interesting information and a lot of stories, how it was made, how it was built, who was the leaders, who was controlled from the state, and so on and so on. So we tried to tell more stories about this architecture, not fixing our attention only on architectural side. So kind of to break the borders of architectural storytelling. Another exhibition which we did inside of one of these buildings. So it was kind of our concept to educate people inside these buildings about these buildings. So this is a marketplace covered with this huge concrete structure, and it was about this type of buildings, these markets, with these stainless steel constructions and the concrete coverings, which can cover a huge spaces. Yeah, it looks like this one. So this this marketplace is still running, and it's one of the favorite places in Kyiv, because on the lower part floor you can see a normal market with the meat, milk and all goods, and super nice old fashioned Ukrainian women, and above you can see this educational part. Another project which I did in another supermarket, making kind of tiles from these photos, and also, let's say, bringing attention for the workers and for the public about this architecture. So it looked like this. Next project also I did about Bilsky. You saw a previous publication about him, and it was about his residential estate, which was the most greenest real estate in the Soviet Union. So he placed this boring residential blocks among the forest, let's say. And then we met this guy, whose name is Florian Yuriev, and we did evening of his legacy and his heritage, and he presented his project, but the idea was to bring attention to his person, because his project, this UFO building, was under pressure of developers, and we saw information that they want to get rid of this building. So we also did a couple of presentations. This one was exhibition about all his legacy, because he was an amazing person. He also was not even an architect, he was an artist and even violin master. So he did the whole orchestra, violin string orchestra. Something happened to this presentation. Just a second. Yes, so this was photos from this exhibition. And another exhibition which was in Poland, in Warsaw. So the goal was to bring attention to this building. And after all, we made a kind of project traditional, regular architectural project about possible renovation of this building. And we presented this project to the developer, and now you can also download this project from a website, from our community website, Save Kyiv Modernism. It was also an amazing achievement because a lot of people in Kyiv, they get no information about this building, and also they were trying to help us. We received a lot of support even from politicians, and they helped us to get to another levels of politicians' offices, let's say, to meet some ministers of education, of culture, etc. And at the end, the Ministry of Culture of Ukraine, one early morning, made a selfie in front of this UFO building with a notion that this object now is a monument of architecture. So today this is officially listed, it is officially listed as a monument of architecture, and this is a great result, I believe. There is also a documentary about all this story. I don't know if it's my fault or not. And another project, because people started to be fond of this architecture, and they wanted like all directors of this or that building were really amazed that they can achieve something more from this Soviet boring building. This was another project about another building, this is the main television center in Kyiv. And after all, it became so popular and so fancy that now you can see these buildings all around Instagram and other advertisements. We can see a fashion performances in front of this building. We can see hipster clothes in front of this building. We can see a lot of fashion in front of this building. Or another thing is that it became so much popular for clip makers. And back then it was quite cheap to come to Kyiv, or you can have a wedding party in one of these supermarkets. So it became too much fancy, I would say. So that's why now I want to hide from this attention to this architecture, because sometimes it also can hurt it somehow. Another issue was the music concerts in these venues, which was absolutely amazing. Like to have a gig in such place like this, you see it's like super nice, it's already made stage. Yeah, and these clips, you can see a lot of them. I did also like a clip which I made from different clips which were filmed in this or that building in Kyiv. And another examples. And by the way, people who are running these buildings, like here is the library, National Library, they can own quite good money for the rent to making these clips. Another example of abandoned bus station in Kyiv, or ex-Lenin Museum, and so on and so forth. And so it ended up with a book. Book was kind of main outcome of this long process. I did it together with Evgenia Gudkina. Here am I, and here is Evgenia. The book is based on a big text which was written by Evgenia, and photos of mine, which I did traveling all across Ukraine. So I covered the whole territory of Ukraine, but I would say that this is a kind of collaborative project because we constantly discussed with Evgenia how to structure the book, what we want to present, because before that there was no information even how to call this period in architecture, because Soviet is also quite a tricky term. Post-war, there are a lot of other questions. Can it be post-war, like second wave modernism, also Soviet modernism? It's not a fair term, and so on and so on. So, but we decided to fix this topic, this name of the project, and also we structure it according to this like sub-styles, like modernism, then brutalism, and then postmodernism, which is also can be discussed, because brutalism in Soviet Ukraine, it was not like brutalism in Great Britain. It was not made everything from the concrete, it was not representation of the concrete. Yeah, it was made from very low quality bricks and covered with a plaster, like a concrete. But yeah, Soviet architects were really trying to be part of the architectural international community. By the way, it was forbidden to use a lot of concrete because steel, which should be used in the construction, was like under control of the state because of military forces. So it was like that. Yeah, sorry, I don't know what happened with the slides, but at least you can see some of the photos. Yeah, so we spent I believe I spent 3 years traveling around Ukraine, and Zhenya did an amazing text, which is maybe the first and last, so far, not last, okay, text about this architecture in Ukraine. So I really suggest you to find this book. I hope you can have it in your library, because it's also quite interesting to compare even Ukrainian modernism, socialist modernism, with Slovak or Czechoslovakian modernism, because there are a lot of similarities on the one hand, on another hand there are a lot of differences. And for sure, like Soviet architecture was much more I would say even like expensive and bigger scales, because there was much more money, and architecture was kind of representation of the Soviet state. Yeah, so you can see a lot of projects and a lot of variety of these projects. By the way, I started to do these drone photos for the first time in my life, and maybe I did it also for the first time for these projects. And it was amazing for me to see this fixed facade from above. And it was like super nice for me, again, as an architect and partly self-educator architect. So yeah, this is one of the most amazing projects in Kharkiv, maybe Zhenya will tell you. And unfortunately, after the war started, at least 20% of projects filmed in these books, in this book, are destroyed or partly destroyed. For instance, this library in Kherson is very heavily bombed, and it will not. You will not see like this never, or maybe there will be reconstruction, but I hope so. This one is in Mariupol, this supermarket, and no one knows its history, because I don't know any friends who are still living in Mariupol. And here you see this library, where one of the most favorite place for making clips, and so on and so on. So it can be told a lot of stories about this architecture. You can find also some webs and Save Kiev Modernism, and also you can find on Arc Daily our publications, and also our short movie, which was part of this book project. Yeah, you can find more information by yourself, let's say. So yeah, and another thing about this book, that I was trying to make kind of passports of these buildings. I was trying to fix exterior, interior, details, product design, etc., because it was kind of a complex Soviet architectural project. And sometimes some owners of these Soviet buildings, directors, they were able to find some material from some friends from another plant. And it leads to some amazing results. For instance, like here, you can see chains, amazing glassworks, which can cost these days like billions of money, or another sometimes weird and strange but funny product design. So let's jump to another project, Architecture Community Time. This is a magazine, and I am also not an architect in a traditional way, but also I am, let's say, academical research, plus I am architectural photographer. And it's also part of my business, I would say, and also part of my vision of architecture, or lens of architecture. And I'm also involved in photography life in Ukraine and in Kiev. And we had a super nice photographer, Viktor Marushenko, who led his own school, and he invited me to make issue about recent situation in urban development. What was changed in the cities in Ukraine, and how we end up with this ugly, bizarre, capitalistic romantism architecture. So I also did some research, because this architecture starts also from the Soviet period, because all of these architects were trained as an architects in the Soviet time, and they did architecture like this, and you saw it also already in my book. So they look like this, like Soviet, post-Soviet architects. But then they started to do this post-modernism architecture, which is called these days capitalistic romantism, and it's quite a good term, because they also were trying to find another language of architecture, criticizing a lot this Soviet boring gray box of flats. This is like this mid-term, let's say, style of architecture between Soviet and new post-Soviet. But then they end up with a project like this, and even, I would say, like visual language of architecture like this, or like this. And it's quite interesting also to study this shift and how they hopefully forget everything about Soviet architecture. And this is super nice studio, an amazing example. So we see famous boxers, Klitschko on the back. Now one of them is the mayor of the Kiev city. And on the right, you can see a person, this one. He was the chief architect of Kiev, and he also had his private architectural studio. So it was amazing mix of business and political statement, let's say, of that time. And he became the richest person in the city. He had his own private yacht, and he used to use this yacht to come to the Venice Biennale. His name is Vyacheslav Babushkin. And this is my collage about his architecture and what he did with Kiev. So this is from the 90s, like this architecture started from the late 90s to the zeros, and then was the main project renovation of our main square, Maidan, after which happened all revolutions. And you see this architecture, which is it's even hard to name it because it's also some post-classical architecture, but did with a very low-cost material. And he proposed another variant of another glass skyscraper in Kiev, in the Maidan Square, or like this one, my favorite one also. So it was the project, and it ended up like this. And I think it's not hard to discover that the project ended up with the upper white part of the building, but then the developer asked, like, please, can we make a bit more? And yes, of course. And now it's the highest building in Ukraine, and it looks like this. And I also did another like critical collage of this building, which is one of my favorites. And another hero, Janusz Wijk, he also did the first glass contemporary Hyatt hotel in Kiev, and then in front of the St. Sophia Cathedral. So everything was in the city center. Also, it was able, because the new technology of concrete slabs they were able to use it because of the opened building materials market. And then he did this wave house, which is also like you can name it by yourself. And then they started to produce more and more there's architectural, like bad fantasies, together with a big business. And at the end, they were not even taking care of any part of the city or the country at all. For instance, another project in Crimea. And it ended up with this situation of uncontrolled urban development in Kiev. Yeah, and the last one. This is like a wonderland in Kiev, and like very specific architectural representation of the first software from the late 90s. This program was called Coral Draw. I don't know, do you know it or not? But maybe this day you can make it in Adobe Illustrator. Yeah, and it ended up like this, you know. And that was the issue which we wanted to discover. How we end up like this, why we're still living in the city, and what is our reflection on the city. So it was the cover, and the name was already kind of reflection, like architecture community time, because we as an architects and we as citizens, we are kind of advocates of the city, and we are responsible for the conditions of the city in which we are living. And I was as a chief curator of this project, and I invited 12 other photographers and selected their photos about existing situation in Kyiv, trying to cover all issues, also not only uncontrolled development, uncontrolled advertisement, also this mix of any, let's say, urban issue in one place. Another thing is this a huge problem with developers. Unfortunately, they are thinking only of gaining money more and more. And on this photo, you see traditional Soviet prefabricated concrete panel system, panel arcs. But even in Soviet Union, the upper floor was like 9s, but here you see like also like 15s, 16s, 18s of them. So. And another topic is my favorite photo. It is struggling between neighbors and developers, and let's say the army of developers and hooligans of the developers. And this author, he spent 10 years of taking shots of all these fightings. And this is like a super nice story, because also it was like we did with UFO protection. Because sometimes neighbors can really save their courtyard or even kindergarten or simply piece of not occupied by the developer's land, piece of land like a small green part. And there was another story which will be my final part of presentation. This we call it Orthodox cheap. This another big business, not developers but church business. When you can find church everywhere, you just need to enter like a supermarket next to the church. And yeah, so there was a lot of topics. Also, another side of saving Soviet modernism heritage. This is a friend of mine, and he decided if all this architecture will be vanished and destroyed, at least he will save it on his body, on his skin. Yeah, so he did this number of tattoos, also in a very rough style. This is Le Corbusier, for instance. It's funny, I would say. Yeah, and another example of conditions of workers on these building sites. And another interesting story is decommunization, because unfortunately it also, let's say, covers not even monuments but architecture generally. And this is like one story about demolishing monument to the Soviet secret police, because this story like they were trying to destroy this monument like years and years. They bombed it, they fired it, they hurt it with a hammer, nothing worked. And then they bring this technique on the far right, and they were, even this technique was destroying it during a week, like constantly, like because this Soviet propaganda monument was made like for the end of the universe.
Sorry, but who destroyed it?
Government.
Okay.
It still is a government project.
Okay.
It's called.
So it's not like neighbors.
No.
I thought it's the same.
Neighbors fighting with developers. It's like on the other street. And another, when the Maidan happened in 2014, everything people started to cover with national flag colors. And it was also a super nice experience to travel across Ukraine and to see this like people's reflection. Because, for instance, here this is Lenin, which they repainted to like traditional Cossack hero of Ukraine. And another example of this shift between times of this new business model implemented in a Soviet socialistic regime, or another issue of weakness of architectural knowledge among architects. You see this interpretation of the traditional architectural form, column, without any clue about proportion, about like the meaning of the form, and etc. And this issue end up with this photo, let's say photo question. So what will be next? Will we save this empty land and give it to our kids, or will we develop more and more this boring blocks? Yeah, and it end up with exhibition as we used to do, and it looked like this. And the last project is book Orthodox Cheek. It was made together with the same publishing house Osnovy, based in Kiev, in Ukraine, and it was about this new era of church religious architecture. So it was also quite a familiar topic for me, because I'm from architectural family, and my father is he was the chief architect of the Sumy and the Sumy Oblast, and as I'm saving Soviet modernism, he was saving this old church architecture, because during the Soviet period, a lot of churches were burned out. Now you will see later some pictures, and he used to take us with my sister to all trips around. So I grew up on this partly abandoned, amazing churches and monasteries. So I'm in touch with religious architecture from my childhood, and this is my father presenting new projects during independence time of Ukraine. Here he presents a new project of renovation of a monastery to our second president, Leonid Kuchma. And this is one of his projects. But also, I am very critical to my father's approach, as well as to all of his generation, because it's kind of copy-paste in this architecture. Somehow, there's nothing new from their side to this architecture, but they were really fond of this architecture. It was kind of freedom for them to investigate and search this architecture, and during the Soviet times, it looked like this. This is normal architectural adventures somewhere on the outskirts of the city, because they were also not even taking photos of this architecture, but also drawing, surveys, etc. And they traveled a lot with this architectural photographer Alexander Ranchikov, and he did also a series of these photos. And through these photos, we can also study the history of this architecture, because during the Soviet times, architecture, church or monastery, if it was not bombed, it was reused in a different ways. For instance, this one is a jail, so prison kind of, based in the monastery. And some other photos of this architecture, because also church architecture is a very essential thing for Ukrainians. Now I will tell you more, and super nice photos, which also I saved. So, Ukraine, most of the territory of Ukraine is covered by Orthodox Church, sorry. And back then, like in the 9th century, this Orthodox Church development started in Kiev, and the first monks were living in the caves. And they were trying to get rid of the universe around them and pray to the God and stay one-to-one with the God. Then we had this architectural monument of all time, St. Sophia Cathedral in Kiev, which was renovated, so it was original project, like Byzantine traditional architecture. And then it was ruined, abandoned after Tatar Mongols, and then it was renovated in style of Ukrainian Baroque architecture, which is something very specific one. So this is original interiors of the St. Sophia Cathedral. And another example is St. Andrew Church, which is also stands in Kiev. It was built by Italian architect invited by queen, or how it's called, Tsaritsa, of Russian Empire. So, and it was built also in a style, in a manner of Baroque architecture. But what is important about Ukrainian Baroque architecture, that architects and people, they combined this very fruitful traditional Baroque architecture, full of colors, full of textures, full of everything, with traditional Ukrainian house, which was only white colored plaster. And at the end, we have this super nice example of Baroque architecture, which looks like a model from 3D Max. But I like it very much because I can see the form, I can see the shape of these buildings, and it's very naive from one hand and very poetic from another hand. And I think this is really a super nice story in like world architecture, when this very official style was combined with a traditional one. Another important hero in searching this topic was Taranushenko, and what is interesting that he managed to save a lot of information, also like service, during his service of this architecture in 1920s and 30s, when the Stalin was already the leader of the Soviet Union and the leader of the party. And by the way, he traveled with his students, who were very progressive. As you see, some of them were already Buddhist, even in 1920s, and they also took photos of all this architecture. It's left bank Ukrainian architecture, mostly made from the woods. Unfortunately, this is the only like material that's saved about this or that building, because like a wooden church is not a saved object, let's say. So it's yeah, and then we have another examples of more traditional classical architecture. This is Pecherska Lavra Tower, and another step of this reinventing new styles in architecture during the late 19th and early 2000s. This is new Gothic architecture, which is quite common all around Europe. And another one is like interpretation also of traditional ancient Orthodox first kind of churches in the 90s. And then this is the first example of this Orthodox ship, when you had a church on the boat. Yes, so it's like a floating church, which was built in the early 20th century. And then Soviet power came, and as I mentioned, they either destroyed or closed all churches. So it looked like this one. Yeah, and unfortunately a lot of amazing examples were destroyed. For instance, in Kiev, it's more like 100 churches were destroyed during like 10 years. And church became kind of anecdote. For instance, this is competition of new railway station in Kiev, and some of the critics add a cross to the roof of the building, kind of criticizing this example of competition project. And there are some other bizarre things going inside the church. For instance, this one is a museum of space based in old church. Yeah, it's quite interesting combination of topics in one place, I would say. But it was also another example of reuse of the church during the Soviet times. And then during the 90s, all these bombed cathedrals and monasteries were built exactly as they were built before. Unfortunately, with a much more lower quality and price of the building. So it really not looking very good. And some of friends of mine, of my father, another architect who is still trying to reinvent this traditional Orthodox architecture, which can be discussed from my side, yeah, and we discussed it in this book. Or another one, which is kind of brutalist architecture. So I would say if it remained like this, it will be much more better than that, because it's really quite a huge example. Or a glass church, which can be, why not? We don't care about air conditions and things like that. So I did this panorama view when I was a student, first year student, because I saw this issue already in the 2002 or 3, when I saw this cross stands in the middle of nowhere in a like suburb around Kiev, and there was behind like shopping mall, McDonald's, and another supermarket. And the thing is that this church became also kind of business. Firstly, they put the cross somewhere. Secondary, like after a week, they built some small cabin. Then they will add a dome on this cabin, and then a new church will rise up more and more. And it's also kind of this developer's church business. And some other artists did some reflections on the project as well. And this also was part of installation, part of our project, which did some of co-authors of this book, Sasha Kurmans. So the thing is that there is kind of supermarket of church details of the church. So you can buy this dome, add it everywhere, and it will become immediately a church. Or you can go to the website and buy your own wooden project according to this or that price, and it will end like this. But on the other hand, what is really interesting for me is that it's really kind of metamorphosis of architecture. And you can see it anywhere, like in these places. And I would say that it's also kind of going back to the roots of Orthodox Church, when you need to have only a small cave and you don't need to have a big cathedral, or you can add a cross on some technical building, I would say, or you can simply add it to this one. I think this is an amazing example. This is really more about conversation with God rather than some ceremony. Or another example. And also it's interesting in a way that people and bishops and all leaders of church, they're trying to invent in all forms. But sometimes, unfortunately, they still doing these very big cathedrals, which are standing also sometimes in the middle of nowhere, because before that, again, like church should be built on some specific place when some miracle happens, or some person died, or something like that. So now it's more about property of this or that piece of land, and about money, amount of money which you have. Or you can see a small church in a scientific institution, which is also kind of rare reflection of the Soviet attitude to the church when they built or they put a new they reuse church. So these days people reuse scientific institutions as a church. So it's quite interesting intersection. And sometimes it looks very weird, honestly. So this project was kind of monastery, and it should end up as a pigeon, white pigeon of God. So maybe you can see this form, maybe not. But unfortunately, it ended up like this, and it still stands like this. And also, as I did in a Soviet modernism project, it's very nice to figure out these all small details, product design, and all other parts of this big world of new Orthodox architecture. But another issue that, again, it is made from a very low-cost materials. Like on the right slide, you can see this polystyrol, which looks like an ancient antique column. Or you can find it also next to the children playground or on the silos on some industrial territory. So that's the end. Thank you.
Alex, thank you very much. This was really a kind of, for me, sometimes really shocking, picturesque images about the Ukrainian landscape. I would like to ask you the topic, the religion and the demand for building new churches. It is really a kind of social demand coming from the people, or is it a kind of let's say, demand coming from the side of the church that the church wants to be present everywhere, or how it really
It
works?
both, I think both. But the main reason is also because of this transformation after collapse of the Soviet Union. Because when you try to get rid of something which was very much natural thing, because church was like part of the world for Ukrainians and like in all European countries, it was something natural. But then somehow we should get rid of all churches, we should forget everything, we should destroy it. So it means, but people are still living with this like church mindset. People still were kind of baptizing their kids and praying in the corners and having some secret meetings, something like that. So when the Soviet Union collapsed, for sure all people were trying to bring back these natural things for them. Unfortunately, what I'm saying that it ended up in this very, I would say, not professional way. It ended up also as a like capitalistic, another example of capitalism, because the church should be as big as possible. We don't care about the place of the church. One of my friends, he's working in a commercial bank, and he said that his favorite client was a bishop. Because he took money from a bank and he covered it according to the plan, like right on the date. And he also presented all his business plan, that this money were from candles, this money were from wedding, and things like that. So it's like a huge business, I would say, yeah? And they're covering like this project as a business at all. But I'm an Orthodox Christian, and I'm not like antagonist or I'm fighting against church. For me, it's really strange in the field of architecture, first of all, because we know even examples from Polish architecture, so-called like Polish churches, yes. Sometimes they're also very like bizarre structures, but this is another like trying to invent a new language of some architectural typology, I would say. Also, we know a lot of super nice examples from the world architecture, like with the small churches like Bohem in Germany, Zunter's Chapel, and so on and so on. But architects are still copying traditional architecture, unfortunately with low-cost budgets. That's the matter. And also, there was a lot of struggling between these two church offices, like Moscow Patriarchate and Kiev Patriarchate. And Moscow Patriarchate sure like occupied a lot of territories, and within the urban development, it was really also, I would say, so church was always kind of example what humankinds we should be, yes? But these days they presented what humankinds we shouldn't be, because they really like occupying space, are not in touch with the neighbors, like pissing you off, sorry for that, like gaining money with the mayors of the cities, and so on and so on. So there are a lot of levels. Unfortunately, there are also not a lot of good examples of this religious architecture in Ukraine after Soviet Union collapse. There are a couple of them, but not a lot. So this is quite a good topic for new architects.
I'm asking also because, of course, the same happened also in most of the post-socialist countries. Like Poland is a very special case with a very religious society, but for example, in Czechoslovakia, it was more about like 90s. There was this struggle for new church buildings, but nowadays there are no new constructions of churches, and the churches are not that, let's say, occupied anymore. So my question was, even if there are really people going to the church,
yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So the society in Ukraine is very religious, probably.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
sure.
Thank you.
Because it was kind of a natural thing. Yeah, and but also now it is more like a politician struggle between ex-Moscow Patriarchate and the new leaders. Even like this main monastery, Kievo-Pecherskaya Lavra, it was under control of the Moscow Patriarchate, and now again it's like fighting like with the neighbors, with the hooligans and things like that inside the churches and monasteries, and it's like apocalypse. It really looks like this. But also, you know, this like patriarchs, like also this Russian Kirill, who are like driving the most expensive cars, having like the most expensive watches, who has like this header of the Kievo-Pecherskaya Lavra. He had his own guard. He had his own part of the Mercedes-Benz. It was like his name, Pasha Mercedes. So
Okay.
God will judge them, I would say. Not me.
I will not rely on that anyway. Okay, questions from the side of our dear audience. Yes.
I just wanted to ask, what's sort of the general public opinion on the modern architecture in Ukraine? Because you were describing the conflicts between the locals and the developers. So, like, what's the general public opinion?
Well, it also depends. Generally, like generation of my parents who used to live in the Soviet Union and who are not architects, they are not fond of this architecture because it's kind of constant remind of that times. And a lot of them spent not the best times in their life back then. Some of them spent much more better times, but basic opinion is more like a negative. But it is completely different with the new generation, because new generation is absolutely amazed because of this architecture. But you know, it was also kind of our main goal to educate people that behind this very dramatic and very attractive architectural forms, there are a lot of different stories. That this architecture is not only about form, because young generation, they are amazed of this architecture mostly because of its exterior and to take a shots and post it in Instagram and so on and so far. So I see it more as an academical researcher, but answering your question, like elder generation is more against this architecture. New one is stands for this architecture, and it's like always like disbalance in this formula. But another thing is that all these buildings are still owned by state or by some private developers. And to take control and to control the quality of this or that building is quite tough task, because during the Soviet times no one counted like heating prices and isolation systems and things like that. And all the scientific institutions these days are kind of a budget hole, you know. So that's why there's another like formula that owners of these buildings, they are waiting while it will fall down, or they're helping them to fall down. For instance, opening windows during the winter times, and there are a lot of other possibilities how to help building to fall down as quick as possible. And then they're building something new on that place. Another super nice case you can follow, it's called Kvity Ukrainy, Flowers of Ukraine. It's another group of young people who protected destroying another building, more like a postmodernism, in the center of Kyiv. And so developer started to demolish the building in the middle of the day, in the Monday, in the working day, and everyone was like shocked. And the other people, they broke the fence. They take away like a driver of this crane who was crashing and demolishing this building, simply called the police and stopped this demolition. And it started in 2021, I believe. So recently they won another court deal against this developer. And it's like super nice case, because the main question of this last court was like authorship of the author on this project and on this building. That the developer wasn't able to do anything without permission of the author. And author hopefully is still alive and in a good mind condition. So you can follow them on Instagram. But this is another example how a new generation is standing for this architecture.
By the way, flowers for Ukraine. We discovered the movement unfortunately too late, because if we would know, we would be struggling for Istropolis in a completely different way, you know, like more fights, more like, I don't know what, more violence on the streets, whatever. Yeah, questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
why did you focus so much, especially on Soviet architecture, and like what attracted you in Soviet architecture that you decided to write several books about it?
Well, first of all, it was because I didn't receive enough information during my studies at the architectural faculty, as I said. But on the other hand, you know, I mean, I grew up in this environment. I studied our faculty. It is in this book. I think that I was always proud of the building of our architectural faculty, rather of the quality of architectural education, and still proud. And even we were studying in this building, I mean, and living in this like residential blocks of flats, like taking metro built in the Soviet times, and so on and so on. And I didn't know anything about this architecture, or I wasn't able to know enough about this architecture, because there were some legends, like one drunk man somehow told, drunk professor told me like there wasn't something, but it was not enough. And yeah, and I wanted to discover by myself what is the story behind this urban architectural environment which we inhabit every day. And also, I mean, this architecture attracted me and my friends much more than this architecture of the 90s. You know, I never worked in any architectural big office, because I didn't want to take part in this disaster or to be part of this making our city worse and terrible. So that was the main thing. Another thing was also to kind of hide away from this 90s architecture, to still be in architecture, but not making this shitty projects, sorry for that, like to be aside of this nightmare, but still be an architect. So that's why I started to be an academical architect, kind of theoretical architect. And it was quite interesting to open this new world of architecture, which also gave me a lot of knowledge. For instance, because when I was like researching this or that building, for instance, I saw a lot of details made by Soviet architects, and I saw a lot of ideas. I saw even how architecture was built or is built, which I didn't receive during my studies. And then I used even some ideas in my private projects. And it was really funny. For instance, and like step by step, then I saw that there was like lightings from friendly Finland countries, you know, friendly socialist countries from Finland, from France, etc. And I saw really like a super nice quality of some pieces of art which you can buy these days, like with a high price, or even Czechoslovakian design, and so on and so on. So this is first of all self-education, and secondary also saving the memory of architecture, because it was really strange that this architecture ended up like 10 years ago, and it was like a blank paper. There was nothing about this architecture, and this architecture was also already started to falling apart. you know, or becoming abandoned and as a ruin. So it was not fair from my side. So I tried to do everything I could, and that was the matter. But again, like question about the Soviet or not Soviet, socialist or not socialist. Yeah, so if you will take away this term Soviet, it will be much more easier. But you can't take away this term because it was Soviet. And to find this balance is one of the main issues. Again, like these days. Because somehow it happened that everything Soviet became everything Russian. Or Russia became like a Soviet. And everything which is Soviet should be like demolished immediately. But the young generation are still trying to protect this or that building or even a monument. Or even to not simply demolish it like it was with that secret police sculpture. Because you can take it away, you can dismantle it. Not to make it like in medieval times, like there's not. At least you can sell it to USA or I don't know, to Western countries and gain some money. But why not? There are super nice examples in Lithuania. This park with the Soviet sculptures in Berlin, wherever. You can another thing that you can interpret. You can play with these monuments, and this is the matter of working with a memory. I would say, because it's another big topic, how to work with the memory, how we perceive memory, how we use memory, how we live in the memory, and so on. And there are super nice examples of working with the memory, especially with the Soviet memory. Not only in Ukraine, but also, for instance, in Romania, I know in Bulgaria, and somewhere else.
Talking about memory, I was wondering why it happened that this relief wall was covered with concrete. Why? It was like because of ideological reasons, or
yeah, a lot of reasons. First one was ideological reason.
But what was depicted there? It was nothing. It was only figurative art.
Yeah, but it was still very tough Soviet times. It was 1982. It was also kind of last.
But when it was realized, the sculptural.
It was realized in, like they started it in 1970. They spent 12 years.
So it was already during communist years.
Yeah, it was, and it was immediately closed because some of the leaders, even the main leader of the Soviet Republic, he didn't. So he came there, and he simply didn't like it. It was.
So it was a kind of personal decision.
Personal decision. Also, for instance, they saw a Jewish noses on some sculptures. So it was another wave of anti-Semitism program. Then there was an issue that they were really, like when this committee came, so before that there was like more or less people who were responsible for giving or not giving permission to this or that project. So in this project, they were more like friendly with the authors and with this structure. Let's say even they were more educated, I would say. They saw some other, even like Picasso's Henrika kind, because it's something similar, yes? But these new committee members, who were like the leaders of the party, they didn't like it at all. And but another thing is that there was a chief architect who was like superstar, Ava Milevsky, by the way, Jewish native one, and they kind of became enemies, architect and this artist, because artist said that it was he who signed these old papers to cover this wall, like he was responsible for giving permission to cover this wall. But the matter is that there should be someone responsible, because its leaders, like president of the country, will not sign his own like signature on some documents. So they waterfall of responsibilities. But what he did another architectural project of covering this wall. That's why we're still able to recover it, because he did several layers, like a scaffolding for the sculpture. So now it's absolutely possible to recover. It's not even difficult to do. you need simply to spend a lot of time, like very slowly with this automatic hammer, also making. Yeah. It is like, but another thing is that there are new people who are against recovering this wall because they are also not able to see this sculpture because it's still kind of cemetery. Yes, and people are coming there like in a very difficult moments of their life. It was another, by the way, reason that the people during the funeral process will be harmed too much with this kind of sculpture. That the Soviet people are not able to think about universe during last farewell ceremony, because the idea of the wall was the history of humankind, and the concept of the humankind, and the living of the soul and the body and things like that, but in a very specific manner, sculpture manner, artistic manner.
Thank you for explanation.
You're welcome.
Yes, please. So let me speak loud because this was very
I hear
I heard nothing.
I have big ears.
Please.
So when you showed the examples of the Soviet modernism, the interiors were very elaborate. So I was wondering if there was, if there were already interior architects, or if there was a separation between architecture and interior, or it was all.
It was all together. Yeah, it was one big project. And for instance, again, this Ava Milevsky, Jewish native, he was a superstar. And he was superstar. There was a legend that he didn't have even his own table. That he was always running between cabinets, trying to find this or that material. And he was able, because, for instance, he brought all this Finnish furniture design to all his projects, to the Pioneer Palace, benches, even door systems, lighting, everything was from Finland. It was impossible, it was kind of wow. And also he did it for another projects. But sometimes he also was able to find some production where he can produce this or that very individual specific ceiling lamp, or also some furniture, or some detail, decorative detail, and so on and so on. So yeah, it was a complex project. There was no separation between interior design, product design, and architect.
But normally there was a big group of working on it, so it was not only one architect, but in this
kind of atelier. So the principle was that there was, first of all, it was called scientific project institutions. And in this scientific project institution, it was kind of closed circle of project production. Everyone was sitting in this building. All engineers, all directors, all architects, even the builders and constructors were sitting there. And architectural studios were based at, for instance, rooms like this one. So there was one leader, let's say Bjarke Ingels, kind of, yes. Also another superstar, and he was also doing nothing. He was only kind of controlling everyone. Yeah, but they were drawing tables, and architects were simply doing boring architectural job. But he was kind of managing all this process. And above him, there was a bigger architect who was simply a top manager. For instance, if another president of Soviet Ukraine decided to close this or that project, he will ask this top architect, something like that. Yeah, but you had possibility to climb up the steps of becoming this leader architect. It also depended on a lot of reasons. For instance, this woman, Tatiana Bilaeva, she won a competition among this scientific institution. Simply, committee decided that her project was the best one. And then she received like permission to build this pioneer camp. And then she received the biggest honor, and it was like flying to the moon for her.
Yes,
Yeah.
can I ask a question? So you mentioned some, and you also showed us some columns, and you mentioned how architects didn't really understood even like the basic proportions or the workings of it. And you also said that you did want to participate as an architect on this kind of developer activity. And I just wonder, is it so that really like architects are so involved with these churches and with these panellax and everything? Because like I get it in postmodernism, of course, but it feels to me a lot of times like architects are maybe they're written but quite in backseat, and it can be even like just a project from one developer to another, just copy paste or recycled without any really creative work from the architect who actually studied something. Like it's just a money making scheme. Big times. What's your experience? Is it really architects sitting in a studio drawing these churches or these panellax, or is it more like a developer?
Unfortunately, there is this architect, unknown architect, who is sitting and making this project, because you can't receive all necessary permissions from the mayors and from the all regulations offices without having this official catalogs of drawings and things like that, and stamps.
Yeah.
And there is a special unknown architect who is only doing stamps.
Okay.
Yes. So that is like that. But for instance, with this UFO project and this new residential mall, we know that the chief architect of this new shopping mall, right hand of the developer, he's a very famous person. He's a well-known architect. He has a huge office. He's not even the worst architect, but he's not getting in touch with us. He simply do not answering calls. It's forbidden to take any information from his office with any project, and he's doing this job. So, because of education, I think that education is the best thing we can do during these dark times in the world.
Okay, so be educated. Are there still some more questions from your side? I see. Oh yeah, there is no.
I would like to ask, when you decide that you want to learn about this topic on your own, what was your first step, first thing that you do? Because you said there was a lack of information.
I went. We have one main castle of architecture in Ukraine. It is architectural library. This is also another super nice example. It's not normal to have specific architectural library, but in fact it is I would say an architectural museum, because it's not only you can find there not only books but also drawings, postcards, photos, posters, etc. And it's my favorite place. And I went to the library and started to study, first of all, these magazines, Soviet magazines, and then trying to find some information in the archives in the library, because there were also kind of catalogs or representation books of these scientific institutions, which afterwards end up in the library. So the first step was library. Then I went to these flea markets to buy by myself all possible books. Then I found out telephone numbers of all architects who were still alive and trying to get in touch with them. That was another story of my life, how to get in touch with 80 years old architects living alone, while a man, I was 30 years old, maybe earlier, calling him and asking him, give me all your archives, something like that. So first of all, they were scary about me and they didn't believe me. So I became I was able to pass through some steps of examination in their eyes. So afterwards they trust me, gave me everything, By the way, I also transferred a lot of materials which I saved to this library. That my, let's say, duty as an architect. To leave this material in the library and that new generation can use them, because otherwise they will like end up also in a trash bin or something like that. Because for instance, this Bilski, with whom I did this publication, we worked on this publication, we worked on the documentary. I also structured all his archive in his studio, in his apartment. And then he died. And a lot of material which I took from him to scan, to take photos, also to structure, stayed in my apartment, which was another reason of argues with my wife, because my apartment slowly became also smaller architectural museum. And I also felt like I shouldn't keep it under my pillow. I should transfer it to other people to use this material to study architecture. Another story is that it's not also quite possible to transfer this material officially, because like I don't have any permission. He didn't give me also any official permission, so it's quite tricky. Yeah, but and there was another stories like that. Or I bought also some things like, for instance, aluminium panels from the facade on a flea market, or sittings from the bus station, or oh, by the way, I bought a lot of materials because when some of these scientific institutions are closed, these archive hunters are entering this institution, simply stealing all archives and then selling them on flea market. And I found out one person who is collector of so-called on this flea market papers, which means photography, posters, prints, etc. And I bought a lot of materials by my own, like the most rare and important materials, and also like presented them to library and so on.
This is what is called passion for architecture.
For sure, and duty as an architect.
Yes, of course. Okay, I guess there are no more questions, so thank you for your questions. And Alex,
Thank you.
once again for being with us. It was really a pleasure. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.